نريد لبنان ملتقى وفاق عربي.
Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. I'm Linda Timima. These are today's headlines. Western powers and opposition representatives meet in Paris. French Foreign Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault says the Syrian opposition is willing to resume negotiations with Bashar al-Assad's regime without preconditions. Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri says Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri is very keen on a speedy formation of the new government and says the lineup of the cabinet formation might be finalized very soon. And at least 5 people are killed and 25 are injured as a cargo train derails and explodes in northeast Bulgaria. French Foreign Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault says the Syrian opposition is willing to resume negotiations with Bashar al-Assad's regime without preconditions following talks between Western powers and opposition representatives in Paris. Ayrault said, quote, "We need to tie down the conditions for a genuine political transition, and negotiations must resume on a clear basis within the framework of the UN resolution, referring to a roadmap for ending the 5-year conflict." Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says the Syrian regime's indiscriminate bombing of Aleppo amounted to crimes against humanity and war crimes, and called on its backer Russia to try to stop it. Fresh airstrikes pummeled the shrinking rebel enclave in Aleppo ahead of parallel talks in France and Switzerland aimed at saving the Syrian city from complete destruction. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says airstrikes and regime rocket fire battered the last remaining rebel districts early this morning. Opposition groups reportedly fired back with rockets. The United Nations General Assembly has voted to demand an immediate cessation of hostilities in Syria, humanitarian aid access throughout the country, and an end to all sieges, including in Aleppo. 36 countries abstained in the vote on the Canadian drafted resolution on the Syrian conflict. A U.S.-backed alliance of Arab and Kurdish fighters have announced phase 2 of its campaign for ISIS Syrian bastion of Raqqa. Syrian Democratic Forces officials said U.S. soldiers will be on the front lines of the push for the northern city. The announcement came after U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter told a security forum in Bahrain that Washington was sending an additional 200 troops to join the 300 it has already deployed in support of the offensive.
I can tell you today that the United States will deploy approximately 200 additional U.S. forces in Syria, including Special Operations Forces trainers, advisors, and explosive ordnance disposal teams. These uniquely skilled operators will join the 300 U.S. Special Operations Forces already in Syria to continue organizing, training, equipping, and otherwise enabling capable, motivated local forces to take the fight to ISIL, and are also bringing down the full weight of U.S. forces around the theater of operations, like the funnel of a giant tornado. Russia entered into the civil war saying they wanted to promote a smooth political transition in Syria that preserved the structure of the Syrian state, which I understand, and which is necessary to ending the Syrian civil war and restoring decent life to that tragically shattered country. And Russia also said it was going to fight ISIL. But then it did neither of those things, and instead has only inflamed the civil war and prolonged suffering of the Syrian people. The fact is, if countries in the region are worried about Iran's destabilizing activities, a concern the United States shares, they need to get in the game. That means getting serious about starting to partner more with each other and investing in the right capabilities for the threat. Given the persistent challenges facing the region, and because the future is always uncertain, developing these core capabilities will be ever more crucial to your security, and you ignore them at your peril. Mutual interest requires mutual commitment. It's not unreasonable to expect any country to do more to advance its own interests. And I would ask you to imagine what U.S. military and defense leaders think when they have to listen to complaints sometimes that we should do more, when it's plain to see that all too often the ones complaining aren't doing enough themselves.
Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri has announced after talks with Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri on Friday evening that the Speaker is very keen on a speedy formation of the new government, noting that the lineup of the cabinet might be finalized very soon. After the meeting in Ain al-Tine, Hariri said, quote, "The atmosphere is certainly positive and hopefully things will move forward and we will reach a happy ending very soon." Asked whether Berri has agreed to give up a certain ministerial portfolio, Hariri said he agreed with him that everyone should cooperate. Berri and Hariri were expected to discuss the ministerial portfolio that will be offered to Marada Movement Chief MP Sleiman Frangieh. The latter's demand to get a key ministerial portfolio is one of the main declared obstacles that are delaying the formation of the new cabinet. Coming up next, pop star Madonna is named Woman of the Year by Billboard magazine. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. French Prime Minister Bernard Cazeneuve says his government will propose extending the country's state of emergency until July 15th of next year due to presidential and parliamentary elections in the upcoming spring. The socialist government imposed the state of emergency in November of last year following the attacks in Paris, giving police extended powers to search and arrest. The extension needs to be approved by National Assembly, which will debate the proposal on Tuesday. At least 5 people were killed and 25 were injured when a cargo train derailed and exploded in the northeastern Bulgarian village of Hitrino. 7 of the train's tanks carrying propane, butane and propylene derailed, hit an electricity line and exploded in flames. At least 3 of the victims remain in critical condition, and authorities say the number is likely to rise. Some 150 firemen are trying to put out the fire and are searching for survivors in houses near the train lines. The accident reportedly demolished around 20 buildings. Moving on to Africa, Ghana's main opposition leader Nana Akufo-Addo has won the country's national election, defeating President John Mahama. Crowds of jubilant supporters gathered outside the house of the 72-year-old New Patriotic Party leader, who had already claimed victory on Thursday, a day after the voting took place. More details in this report.
Ghana's Electoral Commission says main opposition leader Nana Akufo-Addo has won the national presidential and parliamentary election after securing an outright majority of votes. Ghana's President John Mahama conceded defeat in the election and called for calm as the results came in. Akufo-Addo said he was quietly confident of his victory a day before, despite a tight race in the final hours of the election where both ruling and opposition parties had prematurely declared themselves winner. Mahama fought the election against a backdrop of an economy that has slowed since he took power in 2012. 72-year-old Akufo-Addo served as foreign minister and attorney general, and despite being criticized as an elitist, has promised to fix a stagnant economy and fight corruption.
Gambian President Yahya Jammeh says he rejects the outcome of last week's election, that he lost to opposition leader Adama Barrow only days after he conceded defeat to him in a public address. The fresh announcement he made on state television on Friday throws the future of the West African country into doubt after the unexpected election results ended Jammeh's 22-year rule. Jammeh had conceded defeat on state television last week, prompting wild celebrations over the ending of a government that human rights groups accused of detaining, torturing and killing opponents. Protesters demanding that South Korean President Park Geun-hye resign have resumed their demonstrations with a massive candlelight rally a day after Parliament voted overwhelmingly to impeach her and put the fate of her presidency in the hands of a 9-judge court. Protesters earlier marched toward the presidential office demanding Park's immediate resignation. The crowd, estimated by organizers at 800,000, was festive, with performances of music between speeches calling for the early removal of Park. Pop star Madonna was named Woman of the Year by Billboard magazine. For the veteran musician, the highlights of the year come from personal and professional milestones. She said dealing with the challenges of being a good mother were part of her highlights of 2016. Madonna, Kesha and Debbie Harry were among the first to walk the red carpet at the awards ceremony in New York City. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a recap of our top stories. Western powers and opposition representatives meet in Paris, and French Foreign Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault says the Syrian opposition is willing to resume negotiations with Bashar al-Assad's regime without preconditions. Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri says Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri is very keen on a speedy formation of the new government and says the lineup of the cabinet might be finalized very soon. And at least 5 people are killed and 25 are injured as a cargo train derails and explodes in northeast Bulgaria. Those are your top stories for this Saturday. I'm Linda Tamimana. Thank you all for watching us. Have a great weekend.
نريد لبنان ملتقى وفاق عربي